Ladies and gentlemen, today we stand at a critical crossroads where the world's two biggest democracies, the United States and India, find themselves locked in an economic standoff that has captured global attention. This isn't just another disagreement over tariffs or trade routes. It's a battle of vision, pride, and power where every decision echoes across industries, markets, and everyday lives. When Donald Trump, with his bold America First stance, met Narendra Modi championing India's rise as a global player, sparks were bound to fly. Trade wars aren't fought with tanks and missiles. They're fought with policies, tariffs, and negotiations. Yet their consequences can be just as devastating, impacting farmers in Punjab, tech workers in Silicon Valley, entrepreneurs in Mumbai, and consumers in New York. At the heart of this trade war lies a question far bigger than economics. Who will define the future of global leadership? Is it the United States defending its long-held dominance with aggressive trade policies? Or is it India seeking to rise as an equal player on the world stage with unstoppable ambition? This conflict isn't about who wins a negotiation. It's about how millions of people are affected. From the price of smartphones to the stability of jobs, from international investments to political trust, this trade war is shaping our shared tomorrow. But amidst the tension, there's also opportunity, a chance for both nations to redefine partnerships, strengthen mutual respect, and set a blueprint for future cooperation. So today, as we dive deeper into this storm, let's not just analyze policies, but reflect on the bigger lessons about power, pride, leadership, and the global responsibility of nations. Because when Trump and Modi clash, the world listens. And when two giants collide, the tremors are felt by all of us. Let's talk about where all this really began, because you can't understand the fight unless you know the roots. This trade war didn't just show up out of nowhere. It started small, with a little frustration here, a little disagreement there. The United States was looking at India and saying, "Hold up, we've been giving you trade benefits for years, letting you sell your goods with lower duties while our companies and workers are paying the price. That ain't fair." And India, on the other hand, was saying, "Wait a second, we're trying to grow. We're trying to build an economy for over 1 billion people. You can't expect us to play by the same rules as you when we're still fighting to get millions out of poverty." So the first spark was tariffs. The U.S. started pulling back special trade privileges, raising duties on Indian goods, making it tougher for Indian exporters. India hit back by raising its own tariffs on American products, especially agricultural ones. Now what happens when two proud nations start trading blows? Neither wants to look weak. Neither wants to take a step back. And before you know it, the back and forth becomes a pattern, and the pattern becomes a war, not with guns, but with numbers on a balance sheet that affect real people in real ways. Think about a farmer in India who suddenly finds his crops priced out of the American market. Think about a small business in the U.S. that depends on cheaper imports from India, now watching costs go through the roof. These aren't just headlines in the newspaper. These are livelihoods, families, dreams put on the line because two governments can't see eye to eye. And let's be real, both sides felt justified. America said it was protecting its workers. India said it was protecting its sovereignty. Pride met pride, power met power. And instead of working as partners, they started looking at each other like opponents. That's the seed, that's the foundation. And when the seed is resentment, when the foundation is suspicion, what grows on top of that is conflict. And that's exactly how we got here, standing in the middle of a trade war. Now let's move to the other side of the story, because you can't talk about this trade war without talking about the way Donald Trump played his hand. See, Trump didn't come into office whispering about his plans. He came in loud, bold, and unapologetic. His whole mantra was America First. And when you carry that kind of banner, it means every deal, every policy, every handshake has to prove one thing, that America's getting the better end of it. He looked at trade not as cooperation, but as competition. If the United States wasn't winning, then in his eyes it was losing. So when Trump turned his attention to India, he saw a country that was rising fast, taking advantage of favorable trade deals and making inroads into markets that American companies wanted. He said, that's got to stop. He believed India had been given too many breaks for too long, breaks that might have made sense decades ago when India was still climbing, but not anymore. So he cut off special trade preferences, raised tariffs, and put pressure on New Delhi to open up its markets to American products, from medical equipment to Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Now here's the thing about Trump, he wasn't just talking to India, he was talking to his base back home, the workers in middle America, the folks who felt like they'd been left behind by globalization. Every tough stance, every tariff was a signal to them, I've got your back, I'm fighting for your jobs, I'm not going to let another country take advantage of us. That's how he sold it. And whether you liked him or not, you couldn't deny the clarity of his message. But there's a cost to that approach. When you push too hard, when every negotiation is a battle and every partner is treated like an opponent, trust starts to crumble. India didn't just hear demands, they heard disrespect. They didn't just see tariffs, they saw a challenge to their dignity. And when dignity is on the line, no leader, especially not one like Modi, is going to bow down. That's what America first really meant in practice. America's interests first, and everybody else had to figure out where they stood in that equation. And in this case, it meant India was no longer a friend at the table, but a rival across it. Now, if Trump was pushing America first, you better believe Modi had his own vision, and it was just as bold. He called it Make in India, and this wasn't just a slogan, it was a rallying cry for 1 billion people. Modi wanted the world to know that India was no longer satisfied with being the back office of the globe, just doing service work and outsourcing. No, he wanted India to become a powerhouse, a country that built, created, and stood tall in the global marketplace. Make in India was about pride. It was about saying to the Indian people, we can build our own cars, our own planes, our own technology. We don't need to rely on foreign imports to define our future. And that vision lit a fire in millions of hearts because it spoke to something deeper than economics. It spoke to identity. It told Indians, this is our time to rise. But here's the reality. When you start pushing self-reliance on that scale, somebody else is going to feel the squeeze. For decades, American companies had enjoyed easy access to India's markets. But under Modi's push, India began protecting its industries, raising tariffs, and encouraging domestic production. That made it harder for foreign players to dominate the space. Suddenly, big American corporations weren't just competing, they were losing ground to Indian alternatives. Now, Modi wasn't doing this just to pick a fight. He was doing it because India had a young, hungry workforce. He had to create millions of jobs, and he saw industrial growth as the only way forward. But the message to the outside world, especially to leaders like Trump, was clear. India wasn't going to play second fiddle anymore. It was demanding a seat at the head of the table. And that's where the clash deepened, because Trump looked at Modi's vision and saw barriers for American companies, while Modi looked at Trump's demands and saw threats to Indian independence. Both men were standing firm, both were speaking to their people, and both were unwilling to blink. Make in India wasn't just a policy, it was a declaration that India was ready to be more than a partner. It was ready to be a power, and that power came with the determination not to bow, no matter who was sitting across the table. Let's slow down here and talk about what all of this really means for everyday people, because trade wars sound like high-level politics, but the truth is they land right in the living rooms of ordinary families. When the United States and India started slapping tariffs on each other's goods, it wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was food on the table, jobs on the line, and futures hanging in the balance. Take the farmer in India growing almonds, rice, or sugar. When tariffs go up on exports to the United States, those crops lose competitiveness overnight. That farmer, who already lives season to season, suddenly has no buyers at the price he needs. His income drops, his family feels the squeeze, and a ripple spreads through his entire community. Now shift across the ocean. Picture an American soybean grower or a dairy farmer trying to sell into the Indian market. India retaliates with tariffs, and just like that, he's locked out. He's stuck with product he can't sell at a profit, and his frustration grows. And it's not just farmers. Think about tech workers in Bangalore who rely on partnerships with Silicon Valley. If companies start pulling back because tariffs make supply chains more expensive, projects stall and jobs shrink. On the other side, an American small business importing textiles or machinery from India suddenly faces higher costs. Either they eat those costs and risk going under, or they pass them on to consumers, and everyday people in the U.S. start paying more at the store. These impacts don't stop at borders. Students planning to study abroad, families dreaming of a better life, entrepreneurs trying to expand, all of them feel the consequences. A trade war might start between leaders, but it finishes in the pockets of regular people who had no say in the fight. And that's the tragedy. While politicians argue about percentages and policies, millions of men and women who just want stability are the ones carrying the burden. They don't care who wins a tariff battle. They care about whether they can afford groceries, whether their kids can stay in school, whether their jobs will still exist next year. That's the human cost of this conflict. And it's far heavier than any chart or headline can ever show. When two nations the size of the United States and India clash on trade, the whole world pays attention. This isn't some private dispute happening in isolation. It sends ripples through every continent, every major economy, and every alliance. Other countries watch closely, not just to see who wins, but to figure out where they fit in the shifting balance of power. Take China, for example. When Washington and New Delhi started locking horns, Beijing saw both danger and opportunity. Danger because instability in trade can rattle global supply chains that China itself depends on. Opportunity because if India and the US aren't seeing eye to eye, China can step in and strengthens with one side or both, giving it more leverage in the region. And let's not forget the European Union. Leaders in Brussels looked at the situation and thought, if America and India can't get along, maybe we can position ourselves as the neutral partner, the bridge builder, the alternative market. That means trade deals, investments, and influence can shift away from the original players and land in someone else's hands. Now, beyond the big powers, there are smaller nations watching carefully too. Countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America rely heavily on trade with both the US and India. If tariffs drive prices up or restrict access, those nations feel the pinch. And politically, they start asking themselves a question: do we align with Washington or do we lean toward New Delhi? That's how a trade war becomes more than an economic fight. It becomes a test of alliances, a tug of war for loyalty. Even global institutions like the World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund find themselves under pressure. They're supposed to keep disputes in check, but when two giants ignore the referees, the whole system looks weak. That fuels cynicism, and other nations start wondering if the rules of global trade even matter anymore. So the ripple effects are not just about money, they're about trust, leadership, and the story the world tells itself about who's really in charge. Every clash, every tariff, every press conference sends a signal. And when the US and India send signals of conflict, the rest of the world can't just sit still. They adjust, they reposition, and they prepare for a future that might look very different from the past. So after all the back and forth, the tariffs, the speeches, the pride, and the pushback, the real question is this: where do we go from here? Because a trade war, no matter how heated, can't go on forever. At some point, leaders have to ask themselves if the cost is worth it, and that's where the path forward comes in. For both the United States and India, the opportunity lies not in who wins a round of tariff chess, but in whether they can find common ground. Both nations need each other more than they care to admit. America looks to India as a massive consumer market, a place where its companies can grow, invest, and expand. India looks to America as a source of technology, capital, and global influence. They may spar, but deep down they know walking away would be worse than standing together. That means compromise has to enter the picture. It doesn't mean giving up pride, but it does mean redefining what partnership looks like. Maybe it's renegotiating trade agreements so that both sides feel protected. Maybe it's focusing on sectors where cooperation creates more value than competition, things like renewable energy, healthcare, digital infrastructure. Or maybe it's stepping back from the idea of winning and realizing that shared success is the only kind that lasts. Beyond economics, there's also a responsibility here. When two of the world's largest democracies clash, the ripple doesn't just hit wallets, it shakes the very idea of global stability. Other nations take cues from how America and India handle conflict. If they can fight hard but also reconcile with respect, it sets an example. If they let the fight spiral out of control, it tells the world that even democracies can't manage their disagreements without chaos. So the path forward is not just about lowering tariffs or signing documents, it's about vision. Do these nations want to be remembered as rivals who wasted time battling each other, or as partners who recognized their power and used it to shape a better global order? Because in the end, trade wars don't build legacies. Cooperation does. And the world is watching, waiting to see which road they'll choose.